This is sort of a finger wag to the Taliban. When you go back 20 years on, what Mullah Omar had said about Osama bin Laden at the time was that he was a chicken bone stuck in his throat that he could neither swallow or cough up. And what we're seeing is 20 years on, that bone is still stuck in the Taliban's throat. And if they're not going to pull it out, the U.S. is sending a message here that they're going to do it for them. Few in Washington believed after Biden withdrew American troops from Afghanistan there would be any effective counterterrorism strategy at all. That this over the horizon strategy that basically requires drones flying in from the Persian Gulf and loitering over Afghanistan would have any effect. So Biden has shown at the very least this can have some effect in taking out senior Al Qaeda leadership. As for Zawahiri, of course, a long term leader of Al Qaeda now for the past decade since Osama bin Laden was killed in 2012. So, a pretty significant blow to what's left of sort of the terror regime that they've propped up. And the question is going to be sort of how can they find a successor when the U.S. has been so effective at decimating their ranks?
And how much of this is an act of policy for that purpose, and how much is this an act of extrajudicial punishment for his involvement in 9/11 and terrorism since then?
Well, certainly the U.S. wanted to, of course, exact justice for 9/11, the USS Cole, the embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania in the 1990s that Mullah Omar was intricately linked with. But also this is sort of a finger wag to the Taliban. When you go back 20 years on, what Mullah Omar had said about Osama bin Laden at the time was that he was a chicken bone stuck in his throat that he could neither swallow or cough up. And what we're seeing is 20 years on, that bone is still stuck in the Taliban's throat. And if they're not going to pull it out, the U.S. is sending a message here that they're going to do it for them.
And presumably the Taliban are saying that this is not right for the US to involve themselves in Afghanistan.
It's certainly something they'd not be happy with, but when you go back to the Doha agreement that was signed under the Trump administration in 2020, in the waning days of that administration, that really laid out the conditions under which the Taliban had promised not to allow Afghanistan to fall into a terror state. And now what we've seen is that Ayman al-Zawahiri, the most prominent terror target, really left on the U.S. list with a $25 million bounty on his head, was hiding right under their nose, just 25 meters from the abandoned former British embassy in the heart of Kabul, and was killed on his balcony. So, I mean, that certainly suggests that the linkages and the terror problem is much more significant and something that the U.S. is going to look to root out and really wag the finger in the face of the Taliban going
And presumably
forward.
they have deniability, but how convincing is that deniability that they didn't know he was there, that they didn't know this major, the most wanted terrorist perhaps in the whole world wasn't operating out of Kabul?
Not very convincing when you look at the evidence that he was potentially staying at the house of Sirajuddin Haqqani, the deputy Taliban leader. So certainly something that the Taliban had to have known about, and just the proximity to Taliban leadership in that capital, in one of the major bustling neighborhoods of Kabul, Wazir Akbar Khan, where many of the major Afghan government buildings are located. Certainly something the Taliban couldn't have ignored.
Historically, when the US have used drones to take out people, it is not a clean hit. They've targeted the wrong people, or people have been killed in collateral damage. At the minute, this is being presented as a very surgically clean hit. They went after him, they killed him, they got no one else.
That's certainly what the U.S. is saying right now. Of course, in Yemen, when they were able to eliminate the Al Qaeda leader there, almost a decade on now, some collateral damage there. But it certainly looks like a clean hit at this time. What senior American officials are saying is that two Hellfire drone strikes took place on Zawahiri's balcony early Sunday morning and were able to take him out cleanly. So that indicates that the U.S. still has an effective intelligence capability within Afghanistan through CIA assets, even as we're 11 months, almost a year on from the U.S. withdrawal. So the U.S. is still going to look to cobble together some effective counterterrorism policy here that may involve signature strikes on Al Qaeda leaders in the region. So look towards that out of the strike tonight.
And just finally, the future for al-Qaeda. I mean, I don't know how active it had been in the last couple of years, but presumably it's now America saying this is a very dangerous organization to become a leader for.
Certainly, I mean, what we've seen sort of under Zawahiri's leadership is not as charismatic of a leader as Bin Laden, someone who sort of saw the decline of the group in terms of global influence as ISIS surmounted it with the rise and fall of that caliphate in the past decade. And the group, as you said, is going to be hard pressed to find a successor. Saif al-Abdul, one name that has been floated in expert circles, a former Egyptian commando who dealt with sort of the most difficult client franchise within al-Qaeda, Zarqawi, during the height of the Iraq War, as well as Abd al-Rahman al-Maghreb, who's the leader of al-Qaeda's media arm. But just given the reach of the United States military and the United States intelligence community, certainly not a job that a lot of people are going to be clamoring for.